Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Martin Preisler. I'm the team lead of the OpenSCAP engineering team at Red Hat. I'm based in the Boston area. I've been at Red Hat for about 6 years, mainly in a software engineering role. And today in this talk, I'm going to talk about automating security compliance with OpenSCAP for modern infrastructures. So before we get started, let's define our goal a little bit. We're mainly going to talk about configuration. OpenSCAP has multiple use cases, and I think it's really important to make this distinction. In this talk, we're only going to talk about configuration, enabling services, disabling services, changing their configuration, decreasing the attack surface through hardening. We're going to be asking questions such as, is root login over SSH forbidden? Is SE Linux enabled? Are we using proper password policies? Are there any obsolete insecure services enabled, and so on? And we're going to be using SCAP, a standard from NIST, from National Institute of Standards and Technology, to express these security policies. Because a lot of these security policies come in Excel spreadsheets, and there's no way you can automate that. You need some sort of data format to do that, and SCAP is just that. It is a set of data formats. The two most important ones that I'm going to mention are XCCDF and OVAL. XCCDF is a data format for the checklists. It lets you specify a hierarchy of rules, split it into groups, and make profiles. And it lets you write identifiers and descriptions for each of the rules. OVAL is a language that lets you write the automated checks. So you actually write the checks that look into the machine and figure out if you're compliant. Those are written in OVAL. You may also have heard about the other standards that are mentioned here, like CVE, for Common Vulnerability Enumeration. This is basically the name security researchers give to vulnerabilities. And CCE is very similar. It's the Common Configuration Enumeration. So this is a name for some configuration option in the security policies. So we have the standard, but we need some implementation of it to actually use it. And we're going to be using OpenSCAP. As far as I know, OpenSCAP is the only open source implementation of the SCAP standard. I mean, there are reference implementations, but the only fully featured open source implementation. It implements SCAP 1.2, which is the latest version of the SCAP standard. And it's been certified by NIST 2 times, actually. First in 2014, and recently it's been recertified for RHEL 6 and RHEL 7 in 2017. OpenSCAP is a library. It has an API that we keep stable. And it also has a command line interface that we're going to be using in this demonstration. It is included in the Red Hat Enterprise Linux base channel. There's no extra repositories you need to enable. All of what you're going to see is already included in the base channel. There's no extra setup that you need to do. To make things a little bit easier, in the beginning, we're going to be using a GUI frontend for OpenSCAP called SCAP Workbench. SCAP Workbench is a graphical user interface, but it just runs the OSCAP tool in the background. So you still get the NIST certified scanner, and the functionality is basically the same. You just don't have to remember all the command line options. It lets you scan local and remote machines. That's a nice typo. It doesn't remove any machines. And it is also included in the base channel. One thing that's interesting, it's also available for Windows and Mac OS. So in case you're an auditor and you're using a Windows desktop machine or a Mac OS machine, which is pretty common, you can use SCAP Workbench to scan remote RHEL machines from your desktop machine. So this is what we're going to need to scan a machine. We're obviously going to need the system information that we're going to collect. Which packages are installed, what are the configuration files. We're going to need file permissions and stuff like that. We're going to need the SCAP content in source data stream format. Those are the security policies. Those are the rules that we're going to be checking. We're going to put both of these into the OpenSCAP scanner, and we're going to get SCAP results in the ARF format. We're going to talk more about the format later. So we're missing one piece of the puzzle. We're missing the security policies. And for that, I would like to introduce another, I believe the last open source project I'm going to introduce in this talk, OpenSCAP Security Guide. OpenSCAP Security Guide is an open source community project for creating security policies. It is mainly driven by Red Hat, NSA, and government contractors. So it's a community of people collaborating on security policies in the upstream, as we say. It has a GitHub repository, so anybody can make pull requests. OpenSCAP Security Guide provides content for multiple products. We have Enterprise Linux 5, 6, and 7, obviously. But we also have Fedora, CentOS, even Debian, Ubuntu, and other products in the upstream. And for each of these products, we have you have policies or profiles. So you can think of each of these products as it's like a library of rules that you can mix and match together to create profiles. An example of a profile would be USGCB or PCI DSS, DISASTIC, and so on for RHEL 7. So even though you said that you're scanning RHEL 7, you still need to set which profile you're going to use. So let's recap what we're going to use to scan a RHEL 7.3 machine. We're going to do a USGCB scan. So we're obviously going to use the machine. We're going to use OpenSCAP and OpenSCAP Workbench, and we're going to use the USGCB profile from OpenSCAP Security Guide. So the first step is to install all the tools. These are contained in 3 packages. All the OpenSCAP content is contained in OpenSCAP-security-guide package, included in the base channel, so we're going to install that first. Then we're going to install the OpenSCAP scanner, which is the tool that's going to load the content and perform the scanning. We're also going to install OpenSCAP Workbench. I will later show you how you can do all this scanning without any GUI tools. So in case you don't have a desktop environment on your server or on the machine you're scanning, you can just skip this step. This last step, and use the command line that we're going to show later. So this is what happens when you start OpenSCAP Workbench after installing it. It's going to detect that OpenSCAP Security Guide was installed, so it's going to assume that you want to open OpenSCAP Security Guide. So you will be asked to select which security policy to load. Since we're going to be scanning RHEL 7, we will select RHEL 7. But before we go to the other slide, I would like to mention that you can also select other OpenSCAP content and load OpenSCAP content from any other vendor, because there are other vendors for OpenSCAP content. So if you're subscribed to them, you can also use other OpenSCAP content. This is the beauty of standardization. You can just mix and match tools and content providers. So we've selected RHEL and clicked load, which loads the security policy. The screenshot is not very visible, but what I just wanted to show here is that it lists the list of rules, and it lets you select all the profiles. We're going to just keep it as it is and select the USGCB profile. And after we do that, we're going to click scan. Now, when we click scan, OpenSCAP Workbench will ask about privilege escalation, because it needs administrator rights to actually be able to see all the configuration files and do the scan. And after that happens, it's going to elevate rights using PolicyKit and do the scanning as if it was run as root, even though it's a desktop application, so it runs as a normal user on the system. So it will run the OpenSCAP tool in the background and parse the results and report back in the GUI. So let's talk a little bit. Oh, and after the evaluation finishes, it's going to show you a bunch of options. So you can save the results. You can see the report in the HTML format. So let's talk a little bit about the results. So one option you have is you can save the separate results from XCCDF and OVAL. This used to be the recommended practice in the past in OpenSCAP 1.1. But OpenSCAP 1.2 introduced a new format called the ARF, the asset reporting format. And you can think of it as an archive of all the artifacts you need to even replicate the scan, and all the artifacts that were collected during the scan. So the ARF will contain both the XCCDF results, the OVAL results, as well as the source content. So I heavily recommend using the ARF if you can make a choice. I think it's the best format for results. But these are all machine-readable result formats. You can open them in an editor, but it'll be very hard to figure out what went wrong. What you need to do is generate an HTML report from these results. So the way the model works is you have the machine-readable results that you can store, and at any time you can use OSCAP to generate the HTML report. The HTML report is going to be much larger, so it makes no sense to store it. You can just always generate it from the machine-readable results. And let's talk a little bit about the HTML report. It it's very interactive, so it lets you sort around. I'm going to show you a bunch of screenshots. It lets you sort around the rules, filter and group them by various identifiers. But before we go and see the report, let's talk a little bit about the command line scanning. All the scanning we've done in OSCAP Workbench, you can perform the same scanning using the command line tool. The command line interface looks a little bit scary, but that's mainly because the string of the profile ID is very large, because OSCAP specification requires this. So the XCCDF underscore and so on, all the way to the profile is required by the specification. Unfortunately, we cannot really change that. We're working on some UX improvements to make this a little bit less scary, but for now, I recommend just copying these strings because it's a big pain to write them out. So let's talk a little bit about what this does. It runs the OSCAP tool, which is the command line interface of OpenSCAP, and it tells it to evaluate an XCCDF, which is one of the formats we mentioned, the benchmark format. The last argument in this whole command line snippet is the content we're going to use, which is the rel 7 content coming from SSG. And in the middle, we select the profile, similarly as we have selected in OSCAP Workbench using the combo box. And we tell OSCAP that we want the ARF results with -- results -ARF, and we also want the HTML report. I also added the sort of old school XCCDF results with -- results, but you don't need to use that anymore. You can just use the ARF if you have rel 7. So this projector is not great. Hopefully you can see something. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the HTML report contains. The first part of the report contains the information about what we were scanning and when we were performing the scan. So it'll show when the scan started, when it finished, what it was scanning. So it'll show the host name of the machine we were scanning. In case the machine is misconfigured and has an invalid host name or it doesn't make any sense, it'll also show you MAC addresses and IP addresses so you can identify the machine in your infrastructure. It will also show which benchmark was used. So in this case, the rel 7 benchmark, and it'll say which profile from that benchmark was used. So let's scroll down in the HTML report. The next section is the compliance and scoring section, which will show an overview of how many rules passed or failed. I used a fairly strict profile, so 174 rules passed and 180 failed. But my favorite feature about this whole compliance and scoring section is the breakdown of the severity of failed rules. So even though many rules failed, you can immediately see that only 11 of them were high severity all the way to the right. And at the bottom of compliance scoring, you can see the rule overview section, which lets you select and filter through the results. What I like to do is I like to hide all the results that passed and were fixed, because I know I don't need to take care of any rules that I'm already compliant to. I only need to care about the failed rules. So you can unselect these checkboxes. It's not very visible on this projector, but you can also group the rules by various identifiers. For example, if you're doing regulatory compliance for something like NIST 800, you can group it all by the NIST 800 IDs. So you can see the NIST 800 ID and all the rules that are related to it, instead of seeing it in the hierarchy that we've chosen from OSCAP Security Guide. So let's scroll down. This projector is awful. I'm sorry about that. And in the rule overview, you can see the titles of the rules and the results and their severity. It's as simple as that. But what's interesting about this is you can click on any of the rules, and a pop-up dialog will show, which will show more results, more details about that particular result. So, for example, if we click on any of the rules, let's click on any of the rules that passed, and we can see more details about this rule. So in this case, it's disable SSH root login. It'll show you the description, what this rule is about, as well as the rationale, so why you should be compliant to this rule. It'll show the CC identifier, as well as other references from various security guidances. If you click on a rule that failed, OpenSCAP will show you why it failed it. So in this example, there's a rule that mandates that the password has to be at most 60 days old, which is pretty strict. And OpenSCAP has found that in your configuration it's 99,999 days, so it failed this rule. It also will give you a snippet at the bottom, I'm not sure if you can read it, that you can just copy and run, and they'll fix the machine instantly. So I also wanted to mention that we've been scanning a bare metal machine with the OSCAP tool. You can also use one of the other command line tools to scan VMs or containers. On this slide, I have an example of scanning a virtual machine. So I just use the domain name, which is the name of the virtual machine in Word Manager. In this case, rel 7.3. And the big advantage of this approach is that you don't have to install the content or even the scanning tools in the virtual machine. It's going to mount the virtual machine and scan it from the outside, so you don't even have to install anything on it. You can also scan VM images like this, so the machine doesn't even have to be booted up, or maybe it was never even started up. It was just some virtual machine image that somebody sent you. You can do something similar with containers and container images. So again, it will take the container, mount it read-only, and examine it even before you run it. So we've discussed how we can evaluate machines and figure out if they're compliant or not. But what do we do if the machines are not compliant? I mean, it would be very tedious to just go over it rule by rule and change it manually. So what we need to do is a so-called remediation. There's two types of remediations. One is what we call online remediation, which is you tell OpenSCAP that it should evaluate, and then for every rule that failed, it should just run the bash snippet and evaluate again to make sure it was fixed. You can do this with --remediate command line option in the same OSCAP XCCDev eval command line snippet, or you could just click the remediate checkbox in SCAP Workbench, which does the same thing. But I think this is very good for testing. It is very easy to get this working, but I don't think it's the right approach. I think the right approach is to do something we call the offline remediation. So you have some sort of a workflow where you scan all the machines, you get the results, and then from the results you can generate the whole bash snippets for remediation and review them before you run them. Because there's no undo with these remediations, and sometimes they will really break your use case. Like if for example, if your organization is running an FTP server, and this is forbidden in the security policy, these remediations will actually turn off the FTP server, and you may get tickets from your users because they're missing their FTP server. So I really recommend doing this offline and reviewing before you run it. Another advantage is that you can, with offline remediation, you can generate the remediation for a whole profile. So you can tell OpenSCAP to assume that every rule failed, and you want the full remediation for the full profile. Since the remediations are idempotent, so if you run them multiple times, they won't mess up your machine. You can do this and have a whole setup script for the machine. So we have remediations in Bash, as you've seen in the HTML report. The advantage of Bash is that it's available everywhere. So whatever you're using, you can always use Bash on a Unix machine. So you can copy this snippet and run it yourself, or you can tell OpenSCAP to run it. We try to make all the remediations idempotent, so if you run them multiple times, it doesn't mess up the configuration file. But we have an exciting new feature because we're adding Ansible remediations now in SCAP Security Guide. So instead of getting a bash snippet, you get a portion of the Ansible playbook. And you can even tell OpenSCAP to generate the whole playbook for you. The nice thing about this is that Ansible is much more declarative. So it's much harder to actually have bugs in the Ansible playbooks, because you tell Ansible to change something in syscontrol. I mean, this code is very easy to read, it's very easy to review. If you compare it to this code, I mean, there could be bugs in this, and we may find them in a few years. In this, it's actually quite unlikely that there are bugs. There could be bugs in Ansible that they're going to fix for you. And what I recommend with this workflow is you can generate the Ansible playbook, and if you're already using Ansible to set up your machines, you can change your existing playbooks accordingly. So you can add all these snippets that not only set up your infrastructure and set up all your services, but then put everything in compliance. So let's, I have about 8 minutes left, so I wanted to talk a little bit about writing custom content, because this is a very common question. I mean, is anybody in this room interested in writing from scratch custom rules for custom services?
And wants to admit to it.
I'm interested in tailoring. Is this the tailoring part?
It is not the tailoring part. Although I'm glad you mentioned it. I forgot to mention it in the slides, but in OpenSCAP Workbench you can click a customize button and you can tailor the profile. It gives you a very nice interface. So what it lets you do is it lets you select and unselect rules and change values coming into the rules. So for example, in case you really want to be compliant to some policy but you just need to run the FTP server, you can just take the FTP server rule out, and then you will have your own profile based on some compliance profile. But the problem with tailoring is it only gets you so far. I mean, it all depends on the authors of the security policy if they expose everything with values, and very often they won't. And if you're running some very custom service, something that's specific to your organization, there's just no way you can deal with that with just tailoring. You need to write new rules. So let's talk a little bit about how you could do that. So you could just clone the OpenSCAP Security Guide GitHub repository, and with these 4 commands you can just build all the data streams and everything that we ship. So let's now talk about how you could change it. So as I said before, it's split into products. So the first step is you need to figure out which product you want to change. Let's assume you want to add a special new rule into RHEL 7 because you're scanning RHEL 7. So you would go into the RHEL 7 folder and look there. And now there are really 2 categories of rules. If you want to do something like, I need to make sure my service, which is a specific name, is enabled, you can use our templating system in OpenSCAP Security Guide, and it'll generate the rules for you. We have a CSV file called packages_installed.csv. If you just add your package there, your package name, it will generate all the boilerplate. Like, it'll generate the remediations, it'll generate the oval checks, it will generate both the bash and Ansible remediations. And the only thing you need to add is the description and the rationale and the title of the rule, and then you're all set. So this is really the nice case. The other case is if you want to write some complex rule, like you want to make sure your configuration is set up correctly. In these cases, there's unfortunately no way around using oval directly. So you need to learn the oval specification, which takes, it's a strange declarative language, and it takes a long time to learn it, but unfortunately there's no way around it. But we have a community, and we will help you out if you want to write some custom complex rules. So I'll now take questions. Go ahead.
Question on the use case, and that might be if you were spinning up a node in a cluster, for example. The node spins up, you start applying updates to it, then after the updates, then run OpenSCAP on it. If everything passes, then add it to the cluster, for example. Would that be a potential use case of it where it wouldn't allow it to be added if it failed? And the second related question would be results, meaning would it be a reasonable idea to take the results, output them in JSON, and send them to a log aggregation system so that the logging system would have a record of it and as well could conceivably alert on it, the fact that something failed or something passed, for that matter?
Thank you for the questions. So the first question was, does it make sense to have some sort of a system that would check that would actually check that the machine is compliant before it even spins up and is added to the cluster? So that's a very good question. There was a talk by Lucy Kerner about an integration like this done in CloudForms, where you can order a new virtual machine, and it'll be put in compliance by OpenSCAP before it even arrives. So I recommend you check it out. I believe the video is on YouTube. It's from Red Hat Summit.
Can you spell that last? You said Lucy Kerner?
Lucy Kerner, Kerner. Yeah, she has a very nice demo it's very much related to what you asked about, where there's a whole workflow where you order virtual machines and they come in compliant, and they also are continuously checked, and when they get out of compliance, it can send an email or even disable the machine. And I'm sorry, but I forgot the second question.
The second question was setting the results to log aggregation, just so you have a permanent historical record that you could compare or even have alerts, for example.
So we have an integration that does exactly this in Satellite 6. You can use all of these features through Satellite 6, and it can continuously scan and store all the results for you, so you can review them later. And you can also set up notifications in Satellite 6. So that might be that would I think fulfill this use case. You could also write custom code for this, but you can always do that with anything. So, any other questions? Go ahead.
For SCAP Workbench for Windows, to get the SCAP security guide, would you just clone that GitHub that you were talking about?
So, that's a very good question. So if you're using SCAP Workbench for Windows, where do you get the SCAP Security Guide? We include some version of SCAP Security Guide in SCAP Workbench because we figure most people will want to use that. But you probably want to use the latest one. And to use the latest one, you can download, we publish zip files in the upstream project. So you can always go there to GitHub and just download the release, get the zip files, extract them, and then you say, I want to load other content, and I want to load something that's also SCAP Security Guide, but just a different version of it. So that's what I recommend you do. Because we don't, so we always refresh it when we do new releases, but we do way more SCAP Security Guide releases than SCAP Workbench releases, so sometimes the version will be quite old. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Is there any integration capabilities with like OpenSCAP, cluster?
So the question was, is there any integration with OpenShift? I believe there's one in the works, but I'm not absolutely sure. I know there's an integration with CloudForms for scanning for CVs. I'm not 100% sure about OpenShift.
I think the short answer is yes. I just did a demo with a Red Hat guy at a security symposium, and he was doing the CloudForms OpenSCAP for the base layers. And my company comes in and does your app layer, and so we showed an end-to-end flow within OpenShift. You can invoke Atomic, or there's a couple ways you can go about it, but it's there.
Okay, thank you.
With cloud.
I don't think that's the only way to skin that cat. I think that's probably the current favored way.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you everyone.